Hi, my name is Shelby, Redfield, Kilgore, and to those of you who continue to come to my channel and support my work, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much that means to me. And to those of you who are new, thank you for clicking on this video, and I hope you will like, subscribe, comment, and continue on this journey with me about adoption education. And in between videos, I also hope that you will check out all of the other documentaries and interviews that I have on this page about foster care and adoption. And if you are interested, I am also covering my breast cancer journey during this insane pandemic. Today on Adoption Education, I'm going to be answering the question, should adoptive families celebrate Gotcha Day or Adoption Day? In this video, I'm going to be sharing my own personal view, some research I pulled from the World Wide Web, reflecting on some of the insight I've gained from the interviews I filmed over the years from different foster care and adoptive families. And because I actually didn't grow up celebrating Adoption Day, I just decided that I wanted to get some feedback from several different adult adoptee groups that I'm a part of for their input about Adoption Day. And so I posted this question, and I got an overwhelming response from almost 100 adoptees. And I'll tell you that the feedback I received, I wasn't expecting it, and it made putting this piece together much more difficult than I anticipated. So I hope that you will stick around until the end of the video to find out my overall sort of final answer and why it was such an internal struggle for me personally. The first time that I heard the term Gotcha Day or Adoption Day was in 2012 when I went to speak as an adult adoptee about my own experiences growing up at a support group for adoptive parents. And I also was embarking on this journey of filming interviews with different foster care and adoptive families. And when the term Gotcha Day was brought up and Adoption Day, I was at first confused. I'm like, adopting pets? And then when they explained it to me that it was when a baby comes home for the first time or the adoption is finalized, I felt like this pit in my stomach, and it was hard for me to like pinpoint exactly why, because I'm never really good at expressing myself in the moment because I'm still processing and trying to identify it. When I thought about it later at home, the idea of celebrating a day that marks, of course, like starting your new life with this family that has wanted you and loves you already, is the ideal situation for an adoptive kid and the family to be put into a loving, supportive home. And but then I also think of the other side of this story, that it marks the loss of everything you knew before. And for kids that are adopted internationally, they lose their culture, their language, on top of their biological ties. And so I was very confused and conflicted, like why families would celebrate this day. It just seemed very foreign to me and almost inappropriate. And so, you know, as an adult and like coming from a place of non-judgment, you know, I was like, okay, I guess this is a thing that families do. And I thought like it was just something that had become a popular sort of trend in like the early 2000s or maybe late 1990s, because as I was starting to tell these stories, this is sort of what I was kind of seeing with the different families that I was interviewing with. The issue that I see with celebrating Adoption Day is that it's hard when everyone is celebrating around you for you or the adoptee to be able to explore the feelings of grief and loss associated with that day if they were to come up. And in some cases, I almost feel like, the pressure to feel happy and to feel celebratory could lead to them suppressing those emotions and inadvertently delaying the process of grieving. And that to me is problematic, because when those feelings come up, it's important for them to be able to explore them, to process, to talk about them. And I feel like even maybe the family is open, to talk about these things, there still is that pressure from the family, like the parents, if they're still so happy and celebratory about the adoption. So it's almost like sending mixed messages to your child. So that's why it was something that just didn't sit well with me when I really, really thought about it. Because to me, adoption is both joy and grief. It's both of these conflicting emotions and feelings that are very opposite, but you still have to hold them in the same space. The whole Adoption Day and Gotcha Day, like I remember back in 2012, it got me thinking about my arrival day. And while I was only 11 months old, of course I don't remember it, but I know the day. Like my parents were always very honest with me, and so I knew the day that I came over to America. It was August 17th, 1984, and I flew over on a plane with several other Korean babies, and at the airport is when we were first placed into our new adoptive parents' arms. And my mom held me first, and there is this one picture where I'm looking very seriously at my mom, and she said the way that I looked at her, it was like I was asking her, "Are you my new mom now?" Because at that point, I had been moved around more than a few times. I went from my Korean mother to Eastern Social Child Welfare Society, then to a foster care placement, and then to my new parents. So I had already had multiple traumas. And I think because of that, for me, I had to bond very quickly, to attach very quickly in order to survive. That's sort of how I look at it. And then, so with my mom, I bonded with her like almost immediately. When my dad first held me in his arms, I immediately erupted into tears because he had blue eyes, a mustache, and glasses. And that was definitely not something I was used to seeing. We always laugh when we tell that story, but when you really think about it, it was probably very traumatic for me. So I look at that day as something joyous, but also absolutely heartbreaking. It also made me think of my adoptive mother. When she was 16 years old, she was told that she could not keep her baby, and if she did, she would have to move out. Like she could not stay at home. And so my mother at 16 years old felt like she had no choice but to relinquish her child for adoption. And like she carried that grief, that trauma, that loss with her for her entire life. And even after reunion, like there's still this hole inside of her because of the trauma that occurred from that loss, that separation. So I think of my mother and like how much she struggled on the day that she had to relinquish her child for adoption, which was the day she gave birth. And it's not a happy day. So I guess coupled with my own personal views of my own adoption and then with my mother, like it just makes it all very emotionally heartbreaking. Like we recognize our love for each other as mother and daughter. We're very close. But with that, you know, also comes with much loss and grief. And we recognize both and we honor both. When I really think about it, I'm so grateful my family did not do that because it would have been very confusing to me, and it would have, I feel, perpetuated this strong narrative I feel like a lot of adoptees have grown up with about how we're supposed to be grateful for being adopted. And thank goodness my parents never expected that from me or my brother. So since I didn't grow up celebrating this day that I found out a lot of families do, I decided to look up some stuff on the internet. And I will tell you, it was difficult for me because I feel like a lot of the stuff out there is written by adoptive parents and adoption agencies with a very similar message, pushing for like the positives of adoption. And that's, of course, that's true. There is positive stories and experiences for adoptive families and adoptees. It's just not the whole story of adoption, which is problematic for me. There were a few pieces I did find that talked about the controversy of celebrating this day. In an article from today.com titled "Gotcha Day Celebrations Spark Debate Among Families That Adopt," they mentioned that adoption experts warn that it could trigger emotions of grief and loss for adopted teens. I just came across a few pieces written by adoptees, and they talked about how when they were younger, you know, it was fun to celebrate their adoption day. And as they became adults, it became more of reflecting on what adoption means to them and also realizing the two sides to it, the loss and the gain. The few pieces I read online by adoptees definitely seemed to match what I had talked with and gained insight from over the years from talking to other adoptees through interviews and different adoptive families. In early 2020, I filmed a Chinese adoptee story. If you'd like to see her full story, I will include the link in the video description below, and a card should pop up as well. And she talked about how her parents and her celebrated her adoption day. In the beginning, she remembers how they would watch the films that they recorded over in China when they picked her up from the orphanage and brought her home to America. And then, you know, it'd also be a day to give gifts or just to do something fun that day. And as she became older and started thinking about her mother over in China and, you know, not knowing anything about her biological family, she would light a candle or incense in honor of her mother over in China. And when I talk to foster care adoptees and their families, in a lot of cases, they're older when they're adopted, and so they remember their life before. A foster care adoptee in my Kindred series called Transfiguring Adoption, Cody, he said something in his interview that always brings tears to my eyes. But he said one of the happiest memories he has was when he was adopted. And it was because he finally believed that he was at a place that he was going to stay. The relief, like I see in his face, in his body language when he talks about that, is so heartwarming to me and very moving, because he had experienced so much before he had come to that family. In order to take an even deeper look into this question of whether or not it's a good idea to celebrate Adoption Day or Gotcha Day, I decided to ask several different adoptee groups that I'm a part of, like what they thought about it. And I received almost 100 responses, and a little less than half had not actually grown up experiencing celebrating that day, but more than half had. Actually, it was hard for me to sift through all of these comments because it just wasn't what I was expecting, the majority of it. I felt like the minority was more of what my thinking was aligned with. So that's why it was a struggle for me. And I just want to say, like, I'm so thankful for all of the input that I received, and for all of these adoptees coming forward and sharing their thoughts with me. And I was given permission to anonymously share, in a general sense, like the insight that I learned from all of them. And there were a few adoptees who said that I would be able to give direct quotes from them. So I will go ahead and share what I found out. The groups that I reached out to are all very different. There was international adoption groups, there was transracial adoption groups, and there were just adoption groups. And I felt like a lot of responses were from the international community. But it was a good amount of different types of adoptees that responded to me. And I will say all the ones that celebrated their adoption day, their adoptions took place before they were 2, and with the exception of like 1. So I do feel like the adoption day is more of a thing for when babies are adopted, not necessarily older children, unless that's like through foster care as an older child. Less than half that responded who didn't grow up celebrating Adoption Day or Gotcha Day, they pretty much, their thinking was aligned with mine. That they were glad that their parents didn't celebrate it because of like how they felt about their adoption now. You know, as adoptees, there's this struggle that we don't want to be othered or like different. And if their parents had celebrated Adoption Day, it just would have made them feel different and separate than others. I do feel like some adoptees, they like to feel special, but some don't, because we're all different. I guess it makes sense. Some don't want to be made to be even more different than they already are, and some see that difference as being special. Scott Lee Geo shared with me and gave permission for me to quote some of his comments. And he wrote, "My brother and I were adopted together. when I was 5 or 6, and my brother was 2 years younger. I stayed quiet and scared at the airport while my brother was kicking and screaming for his Uma, while my adopted father carried him out of the airport. We never celebrated Adoption Day or Gotcha Day. Gotcha Day makes me think as if people treat adoptees as animals. One of the adoptees who didn't celebrate it but found out as an adult, like I did, that this was a thing, this adoptee said that it made her feel jealous. It's just an interesting way to look at things, that she missed out on something a lot of other families are doing. There was one adoptee who grew up not celebrating it, but he knew another adoptee and his family celebrated that day, and it made him really jealous. But by the time he was an adult and reflected on it, he realized that he was very glad his parents didn't celebrate it. One of the interesting things I've learned is that I thought that most of the adoptees that would be sharing with me would be adopted from like the late 1990s or early 2000s that celebrated it, because that's when I thought it became like this thing to do. But that wasn't the case. So that was like one of the first things that I was not expecting. They went as far back as the 1960s and 1970s. And the majority fell in the 1980s through the 2000s. So that was kind of a shock for me, because I'm like, I was adopted in 1984. But there's a lot of other adoptees that were celebrating it. So I think it was just more of like, depending on the family and the adoptive parents and how they saw it. Also from these adoptees, I learned all the different names that the families called this day. They called it Family Day, Adoptiversary, Arrival Day, Coming Home Day, Airplane Day, or Happy Day, My Coming to America Day, Coming to America. Sometimes it would be what the child wanted to call it, and so it would be the child's name and then day. So if I had been celebrating it, I would have called it Shelby Day. But the most popular names were to call it Family Day or Adoption Day. So Gotcha Day, I feel like, was popular in the 2000s, but then because of the name and sort of the controversy over that name, it just sounds like snatching up a child or even kidnapping a child. One adoptee described it as, just doesn't sound right. Plus it's pulled from like adopting a pet, you know, that's problematic, I feel, because they're children being adopted, not pets. One domestic adoptee shared that on Adoption Day, she would receive flowers and a card, and you know, it made her feel special. But as she became older, like an early adult, her parents stopped doing that. And what happened was it made her feel like, was she not grateful enough for being adopted? Is that why they stopped? So it made her feel less than and very insecure about being their daughter when that stopped. As an adoptee, we always want consistency. And when that stops, that can make you question and doubt and feel very, very insecure, which is what I felt, you know, when she was sharing that with me. One adoptee expressed it as like celebrating 2 birthdays, or more accurately, celebrating 2 Christmases when your parents are divorced. And I thought that actually makes more sense to me, because my parents did separate and divorce when I was a senior in high school. And when we started celebrating the holidays separately, you know, I would come home from college and whatnot. That was really tough. It was a reminder of the trauma of our family being separated, because I'd grown up with my family being based and bonded together by love. Like, that's what glued us all together, was love. And when that was broken by our parents, it was shattering and heartbreaking to me. It's like great to get extra presents and to have more celebrations, but at the same time, it's a reminder of what was and what was lost and what was broken. Some adoptees that aren't really sure when their actual birthday is because they were left in a park or they were just left somewhere where the parent or caretaker knew that they would be found. Those adoptees, most of them share that celebrating the adoption day is a bigger milestone for them because that's like a firm date that they know is true, whereas their birthday is not actually something they're sure is the proper date. Actually, May, the Chinese adoptee that I filmed with, she expressed that as well, that she wasn't quite sure when her birthday was. You know, having the adoption day like as a firm date was something important to her. There was one adoptee who expressed how much she loves her parents and felt very, very loyal to them. And as she grew up celebrating this day, she knew how like excited and happy her parents were to celebrate this day. And so even when these emotions came up that were conflicting about her adoption, like she didn't have the heart to like tell her parents that she didn't want to celebrate the day anymore, or to maybe honor it a different way. And as they became adults, her sister actually told them it wasn't something she wanted to do anymore. But then like this adoptee still kept it going because she felt bad for her parents. And finally, you know, she let them know. But it took a while because of this feeling of letting them down, of disappointing them, of feeling guilty. It's when the adoptee sacrifices their needs and their mental health for that of the adoptive parents. That's when I feel like it's a big issue. And this is this fine line, tricky line we have to walk on as adoptees. And that kind of weight shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be carrying that kind of weight when they're a child, and not as an adult either. So that's a tough one for me. Some adoptees express that the day that they were adopted or they came to their family for the first time, that it marks a day that changed the rest of their life. And it's a day to consciously reflect on their adoption. To some adoptees, this day is a reminder of deep sadness, loneliness, and heartache. For some adoptees, even birthdays, if they were abandoned at birth, that is actually a day that they don't feel comfortable celebrating. It's painful for them. It's a reminder of the day that they were given up. Some adoptees said this was a day to celebrate, eat cake, get presents, go to a restaurant and eat whatever food they wanted. Sometimes it was, if they're an international adoptee, the food from their country of origin. And it was also a day to watch their adoption videos. So it was a happy time and a second birthday for many that celebrated it. One adoptee that was adopted as an older child from foster care, she said that on that day it wasn't celebrated, but it was a day that her mother would share again all the stories she knew about her first mother, first family. And her mother was very conscious of the trauma that she had come from, and she is so grateful that her mom understood that and was always there for her to answer any questions she had. Some adoptees, as an adult and coming out of the fog, which is another question, like what is coming out of the fog, that I'll answer in one of my other episodes. Some of the adoptees that have come out of the fog said that that day just doesn't matter to them anymore. And, you know, when they were kids had celebrated it. An adoptee named Andrea Maldonado commented and gave permission for me to share an excerpt from her comment. Andrea said, "Adoption Day, hated that date and made me feel so sad and lonely. Now I understand why. It was such a big deal for our adopters. We had a proper meal in a restaurant and we had to act like everything was okay when it wasn't. It was a day about them, the actual journey, and the stories about us while they were in Colombia. It was an invalidating day and still is. We weren't allowed to ask about our bio family, our past, or even talking about our birth country. It is just selfish celebrating that day, even if adopters make it about their adoptees. It is just a reminder of our identity erasure." The main thing that caught me off guard, just wasn't expecting, was a majority of the people that did grow up celebrating Adoption Day, even as adults, still had positive feelings about celebrating that day, and even still do as an adult. And I think that's what was confusing to me. I just wasn't expecting it. But a lot of the adoptees explained it as this is the day where they finally met their parents and started their new life with people who had been waiting for them, who loved them, who wanted them, who desired them. And the other part of that was that they were rejected, given up. And so it's almost this idea that it's better to be with someone who wants you. And so this day was really about celebrating being with a family that wanted them. And that's what they believed and celebrated. When I hear that, I think that, you know, if they don't know the truth behind their relinquishment, then they don't really know if their first mother, first father wanted them. And this is only because I've heard of adoptees where, in their stories about how sometimes the parents come back to try and claim their child that they had left at an orphanage because they had changed their mind, that they were going to try and make it work even with the poverty that they were living in, or whatever the circumstances may be. But it was too late. The child was already adopted out of the country. And so that's what's so heartbreaking for me. The adoptees that grew up in an environment where they felt like they could talk about their adoption and all of its complexities, including positive or negative feelings, processing their grief, but also celebrated their adoption day. When they became adults, they look at the day not as just a day to celebrate now, but as a day to mourn and to honor, and to use that day in any way that makes sense to them at the time. One adoptee that gave me permission to quote him, Chris Dietrich, summed it up perfectly for me in a way that I thought most of the adoptees as adults would reflect on Adoption Day if they had celebrated it growing up. He said, "Since processing my adoption with the adoptee community, I have become cognizant of the losses associated with my adoption. Asian family, Korean culture, my roots. I used to view my adoption as a dichotomy, this or that, but have now come to regard it as a duality, this and that. overall takeaway from everything that I've learned in putting this video together, adoptees, we're all different. For some, it may make sense to honor the adoption day. For some, it may be very harmful. So I feel like as a parent, you have to really know your child and really feel the temperature of your child as far as where they are at in their relation to adoption and what their feelings and emotions are. And just to let your child take the lead on that day, whether they want to recognize or honor it or celebrate it, or if they don't, and it's not something they really want to be reminded about. And so really let your child decide if they want to celebrate Adoption Day in a way that honors both the gain, but also the loss of everything that came before and what that means, and help them be able as a child to hold both of those emotions at the same time. Because I think that's a struggle that so many of us have as an adults, when it was hard to reconcile both of those feelings growing up. It was an internal struggle for me because of my own personal experience with adoption, with my adoptive mom and her experience as a first mother and what that day has meant for her. So it was hard for me to do this video. I expected for most adult adoptees who had celebrated it when they were kids to say, yeah, I had fond memories. It was like celebrating a second birthday. But as an adult, reflecting, like I realized, it didn't really allow me to see the other side of adoption, which is loss. And now I'm very conflicted about that day. That's what I thought I would get a majority of responses from the adoptees, and it wasn't. It's just a reminder to me that all of our experiences as adoptees are all so different. And I think just as long as parents are really aware of their child's sensitivities and needs, that it's okay, depending on what the child wants to celebrate it or not to celebrate it. I just want to thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you will make sure to subscribe, like, and comment. It's one of the best ways that you can support my work so I can continue making these videos about foster care and adoption, which has been a passion project of mine since 2012. And another way you can support my work is by purchasing a book called Rooted in Adoption, a collection of adoptee reflections. It's a book that I helped put together with another adoptee named Veronica. I'll include that link down in the video description below, and a card should be popping up as well with some more information. Also, I'll include links to Etsy and Redbubble where you can purchase Rooted in Adoption merchandise. And all of the proceeds will go to helping Veronica and I continue to spread awareness and education about adoption. Join me next week as I answer the question, how should I respond to "You're not my real mom"?